Welcome to the July 17th edition of the PFF Forecast. I'm George. I'm joined as usual by Eric. We have a great show ahead of us today because we're going to talk about betting again. We've got a funny thing to talk about though. So it's going to be a good conversation because we're going to talk kind of about the things that you see in the betting space now and how a lot of what you see it may not be what it appears. I guess maybe the best way to tease that. Then we are going to talk about betting NFL futures, but division win totals. So how many wins will a team win in their division, which will make for some very interesting conversation. And who knows, maybe we'll throw a recommendation out there in the end. Let's rock. Fresh off of a wedding. You didn't crash it though. This was a wedding you were invited to, correct?
Reluctantly. In fact, I want to say that I just got back from the Mall of America with my dear friend Ben and his family and my family. We got in, kind of late. I'm kind of late to the show. Sorry, Ethan. And I was rushing up the stairs and my sister graciously stepped aside to let me run upstairs, and then threw out one of those passive aggressive Minnesota "you're welcomes" at me, which has me a little tilted, has me a little upset. But you know what? We live this life in love, George. We live this life in love. It has been a somewhat chaotic weekend at the Eager house, but love you, Dad. Yeah. So it's been a good one. Camp Snoopy sweat. So you gotta imagine me and Ben Brown, who used to host the PFF betting podcast, sitting there while our kids are on rides, sweating out the Las Vegas Aces versus the Connecticut Sun on our phones. That is, there was a comment on the last show that said from Blake Smith, "I'd like to see you guys do this podcast. You two go out and do stuff in real life and then break it down. The mall, a concert, boot camp, or maybe a nice sociological experiment like behavioral economics, and then of course you break down the results." So
I'm here for that. What would be would a mall be a good place to do that? I feel like that would be some funny content, probably for me trying to figure out what the fuck is going on at the Mall of America. So in full, sorry for swearing, by the way, in full disclosure, when Eric got on the Zoom and he told me that he had been at the Mall of America today, my reaction was, "Oh, the mall, what were you doing with kids at the Mall of America? Isn't that just a bunch of stores?" And you had to tell me that the Mall of America is a theme park. Which tells everyone a lot about my context.
It is both. So Caribou Coffee is this coffee. It's now French, like the French own it, but it was created in St. Paul. And so it's like the Starbucks of the Twin Cities. There are 4 Caribou Coffees in that mall alone. It's that big. There are, so these numbers may have changed, but when I was a kid, there were 2 Champ Sports and 5 Foot Lockers at one point in that. So it's massive, right? And I think what would be interesting would be going to the mall with you and which store makes the cut, because you're not going to Nordstrom. You're not going to Nordstrom Rack. You're not going Old Navy. Old Navy's out of the picture.
Oh man!
And I don't even go to Old Navy. But I will go to the Gap. I know I'm a big guy, and so the Gap is kind of a weird concept for somebody like me. But I'll go to the Gap. I'll go to Express. I even H&M is the bottom of the barrel for me. But there's some zany things there, and I can be kind of zany. But my thing, my big thing for me would be what would make it? What would make the list? Or are we just getting 10,000 steps in, right? That's kind of where I'm at.
I think we would have to go and we'd have to ask people certain things at different stores and, take stock of what. So one of the things that I'd be interested in asking is what's your go-to, what restaurants do you go to, but ask that of people at different stores and see kind of what that looks like. I'm not beneath any of these stores, but I will say this is my take on malls. malls are an ingenious idea of a way to get people to spend money they don't need to spend. And so every time I go to a mall, if I'm just going there without any, just to browse around, I feel like I am the dumbest person on earth. Right? Because like you're going there, you don't need anything. You can't even think about what you need. But then you're just going to be tantalized by all the things throughout the place. And you go, you know what? I do need that. You know what? And my favorite place for this is Sharper Image. So you're walking by Sharper Image, and it's like, here is a remote control back massager. And you're like, you know what? My back is feeling a little tight. I could use one of those, and you're like, so I grew up near the Stanford shopping mall, which is a terrible place if you want to save any money. And I tried to only go there when I absolutely need something, because if not, you're just walking out a poor person. That's my take on malls.
The issue with me is that everywhere I like to go in the mall is basically somewhere I could go normally now
without it being in a mall.
Yeah. So like the Barnes and Noble in the Mall of America is massive. It's amazing. It's a monstrosity. It's amazing. But like there's a biggish Barnes and Noble like in Mason next to my house in Ohio. So this is where, and maybe this is like where I miss it, because I'm not like on the cutting edge of like what's coming out now, type of thing. Mm-hmm. Like I'm old and I stopped caring. But like back when like Lululemon was only in like a few stores in the US, right? It started in Canada and kind of came down. That would be a thing for the Mall of America, right? It would be like Lululemon. There was only one Abercrombie. So this is funny. I'm showing my age, but there was only one Abercrombie and Fitch, I believe, in the entire Twin Cities, and it was in the Mall of America. So like stuff like that, where I guess for me in my life right now, there's nothing in the Mall of America that is so exclusive to that area that I need to go. Caribou Coffee is another one. Like there's like one, I can bike from my parents' house to like 6 different Caribou Coffee locations in like 20 minutes or less. So like, why do I need to go to the Mall of America for?
Easy, Lance Armstrong.
Yeah. So
so
you did it with one ball. I need 2 though.
I do think we got some good feedback on the show from our last show. By the way, if you didn't listen to it / watch it, go check it out. We kind of dug into all of the different things that sparked by listener questions about betting, about how lines are made, about, professional bettors versus casual bettors. And then we kind of got into some questions where Eric and I asked each other questions. And one of the questions that I asked was, what's a podcast that you would do if you had to do it on a different subject? Your answer was very good. It was a podcast on the growth mindset. And there was some, now maybe this is us selecting the positive reactions to this, and everyone that heard that and rolled their eyes didn't decide to mention anything on Twitter, but there's some positive energy around that podcast. And I think one thing we could do is we could have a podcast that kind of does these sociological experiments and kind of tie it back to, things like the growth mindset, right? And figuring out, I would be very interested in what the growth mindset looks like across different stores in the Mall America / other malls. But I digress at this point, because we want to talk a little bit, piggyback off of the conversation that we had about betting. And ironically, it was a couple days afterwards, a good friend of ours, Ross Tucker, who has many, many different podcasts. And he's a true gem. If you don't follow Ross Tucker, he gives you food content. He gives you football content. He gives you podcasts that are less than like an hour long. Most of his podcasts like 30 minutes long. He's a pro. At some point, he's going to get a shot to call games, I think, in the NFL. Well, he already does for like some of the preseason games and stuff, and on radio. But like, I mean, on actual national TV. And he had someone on who works, I guess, only part-time with Action Network. Because they also claim to be a part of a betting syndicate. And you sent it to me and we're like, this was pretty funny. And I've got to admit, it was one of the hardest I've laughed at a podcast in a very, very long time.
This is one of those where like when multiple people, like, so somebody actually asked, David Carroll said, LOL, so you're saying books use sharp bettors as an ensemble to learn learning in early betting cycles. And like, interestingly, this was another example of the ensemble of sharp bettors that ended up getting me to the truth, which was I literally got a few, texts and DMs saying, "Hey, I loved your podcast. By the way, did you listen to this one?" And it was like a handful of people. And so, of course, I listened, and it was weird, right? Like, because this gentleman, and like, look, this isn't personal. Like, we don't know anything about this guy. I've actually been on a podcast with him once when Chad Millman called him professional bettor Simon Hunter, and I, honest to God, heart crossed my heart, hope to die, thought it was a bit. And but like, so he's on the Action Network, and like, he talked about, and Ross, like, bless his heart, like, wanted to know what it was like for a person to be on a betting syndicate. And my brothers and sisters in Christ, I got to tell you, like, a person who's in the betting syndicate that this person presumably is in, like, with rare exceptions, like, I think of like somebody great people who are in, like, Rob Pizzola does a great job with Circles Off, does a great job with BetStamp, also makes a significant amount of money betting sports for a living. I think like those people are sort of unicorns. Most people who are making significant money, life-changing money betting are not. Like, there was something he said about how if he gives out a pick on like a show, he's got to pay the person in his syndicate to do that. And I got to tell you right now, I go on every single show that to talk about betting, and I'd like to think that what we make doing that in like speaker fees, if they exist at all, which for most people they don't, but on the times that we do get paid for these, I'm telling you, if you were in a real syndicate, you would not be making anywhere close to what it'd be worth to keep that bet to yourself. And B, if you actually gave it out and your syndicate was sharp, you'd be giving out a bet that was like so far away from what you actually got, right? Mm-hmm. So let's say in a game you're laying. So this morning the aces were -1 on the money line. They were like, I think -115. Once everybody realized Jonquil Jones was out, it was -3.5, and I believe they were like -150 all the way to -170. Like, if you knew that information before anybody else, and you laid -115, and then you go on the air and give out either you giving out -115 means your initial bet was not sharp because the market didn't move, or you're giving out -170, in which case you're doing a disservice, right, to everybody else that you're talking to. That was, and that's like obviously the issue with media, and I think we try to be honest about that. But like that mean, in that case, like, that particular part of what he was talking about was clearly either a lie or a figment of his imagination.
Yeah, I encourage people to go listen to the podcast, because we're not going to, like, for people that haven't listened to it, sitting here and recanting it might not be the most enjoyable thing, but it brings up a point that maybe we talked about a little bit last podcast, but bears mentioning again, which is, if you are out there betting on a recreational basis, right? And we have a lot of very sharp people that listen to this, some of whom, do actually bet for a living, but most of which have, jobs, normal jobs. They love sports. Maybe they know a little bit more about sports than most people. They bet on sports, but you're still a recreational bettor for sure. You are, by and large, not going to be finding professional bettor picks on Twitter or on websites, right? Like, that's just not, that's not going to be something that you're going to find in a video on YouTube, right? Now, there are some places that have done a really nice job of trying to bring transparency to people who are selling picks, right? And I think a good example of that, you mentioned Rob Pizzola. BetStamp, if you have not used that app before, allows people to track picks. You can track picks of people, and you can see, like, how does this person who's selling picks potentially, how are they performing? And I think that the thing that I take away from it, Eric, that hopefully most people do, is I find the amount of time that it takes to create good content and the amount of time that it would take to be a professional bettor, those two things probably don't exist in the same space because you don't have enough time to do both. If you are truly grinding to be a professional bettor, you don't have time to sit down in front of a camera when you are going to be placing those bets and go like, here, let me talk about your bet, these bets,
Well,
like it's a
or
hard
you
job.
have so much in the way of resources that, like, you have a lot in the way of resources, right? So you have a team that is doing a lot of that modeling for you, a lot of that, which was another interesting part of that discussion where he was saying that he has a few guys. I mean, there was the whole funny business that, like, our friend Joey Kinish, who we're going to try to get on the show here, talked about, like, how he said he bragged about he's never had 2 losing weeks in a row in the NFL, which, again, my brothers in Christ, like, that's not possible. There's like there's no, I mean, just run a simulation one time in your life and see, like, the number of coin flips that can go tails in a row before you say something like that. But there was also, it was interesting because he was saying, like, he has people convincing him of sides and totals, like it, as if it was a conversation, which it's like, that doesn't scale nearly well enough, I don't think, to have like a big time operation. Like, a lot of these are modeling, and again, I might not know. There might be, and I know, like, Alan Boston, somebody, Dink, who, by the way, is battling cancer right now. Our thoughts are with him. Guys who are, like, kind of in the old school, have been very successful betting sports. Like, we'll do it on pencil and paper and stuff like that. But those guys are kind of like one person, and I know Lay the Favorite made it, that he had a team, but it's not that big of a team. Those teams don't scale nearly as well as, modelers and, folks with significant, like, sort of software and stuff like that. So it's interesting. I do think that, this space is tricky and this space is kind of messy, but transparency and honesty is sort of a big thing that, and that's why you and I try to make sure that we say, look, I make money betting, but I don't make a living off of betting, because I think that I want to make sure that there's some respect on the names of folks that actually have the capital and actually have the time it takes and the sharpness, frankly, to make a living betting. Because I think when somebody sort of pretends to do that, it seems to me a little offensive to the people who are really doing it.
That are actually doing it. And the thing that I should mention, of course, is the most prohibitive factor to being both a content creator and doing it professionally is, if you're giving out what you're doing professionally, you're putting information that you are leveraging to have by yourself to make that money. So, like, you're working against yourself if you're really giving out, the information in real time. You're not able to capitalize as much on it. So that's obviously a thing. But here's the thing I was going to bring up with you. We talked about this a little bit a couple of days ago, not on the podcast, off air, which is, if you're an above, if you're, I hate to use the word smart because we're just talking about growth mindset, but I'll use the word smart here just to stand in for, like, you have, kind of a keenness on something that others don't have that's unique. Let's say you're very skilled mathematically, you're someone that wants to use math to make money. Sports betting, while fun, is a really bad way to leverage that skill. Like, you are way better off. I mean, and I'll give you a couple of examples. Like, you can't just get, infinite liquidity. And I know there's not infinite liquidity everywhere, but, like, comparing it to the stock market, like, if you want to bet on a company, the ease with which you can get money into betting on that company versus betting on a team, it's dramatically different, right? Like, it's so much harder. Sports betting, professionally, half the battle is just getting the money down, right? Mm-hmm. And then you've got all of this randomness. And I think this would be something that's interesting to quantify a bit more, which is the randomness within sports versus the things that you can know about, say, a company, how it's doing, the economic climate that can allow you to make, these bets that you also can see play out over time, right? Where in the NFL is one example, but in sports in general, those are time horizons that you don't get to work with, right? It's very kind of discrete, like game, play, season or whatever. And so my question to you is like, do you think, does that, I mean, how do you agree with that first off? And if so, is there an advantage to be had either by someone coming in and being, sharp there and being algorithmically driven, or is it just something that's fun and we need to accept that that's the case?
Yeah, I think we all do these things because we like to have a little skin in the game. I think it makes everything infinitely more fun. I think everybody, so you talk to like a lot of these pro bettors and you ask them like, you listen to podcasts like Rob's podcast or Spanky's podcast, Rufus Peabody, who's also, one of the pioneers here. And I think invariably when anybody asks them, like, would you tell your children to do this? They almost all say no. I think it's like one of those, it's a labor of love a lot of times. It's also like a puzzle, right? Like, I think a lot of people just like solving puzzles, right? And whether mathematicians are solving puzzles as, tenured professors at universities, or, these guys are trying to find like the latest place to sort of find an edge, like it's all that. And I think the difference obviously between betting on, like, let's say you bet on an index fund, you put, your money in an index fund, which you probably should do, by the way. This is not financial advice, but it's stood the test of time. I think when people put their money, like, let's say in an index fund, and it goes up or down, there isn't that satisfaction because you're just basically getting the return that everybody else is. When you bet on like, let's say you bet on the Lions this year to win the NFC North at 10-1, and everybody calls you a freaking idiot, and then they win, then you get to stand out above the crowd and be like, I was smart in that instance. And by the way, for the most part, it's usually just luck. And so, a lot of people like to attribute their losses to bad luck and their wins to how brilliant they are. And that's why a lot of people are losing bettors. But it's sort of that like puzzle solving. It's that sticking your neck out when no one believes in you. It's the beating the game that I think a lot of people are driven by, that ultimately is one of the reasons why sports betting is so appealing and so fun. And frankly, if you do it within your means and you have a bankroll that's separate than your living expenses, which we have, and and you do it as a group, and you have people that can lose and win with you, that I think is fun. Like, I think it's fun when, like, you come back from your second workout on a Sunday and we've gone 0-3 that day, and you're like, yeah, I'm like, how's it going, George? And you just look at me like you want to kill me. And like, that's kind of fun. Like, and when we win, that the issue with you is like, you're different. You're very asymmetrical. You don't enjoy wins and you hate losses. But whereas I think I'm more like, I think mean is somewhere close to zero there. I think the cycle. So actually there was a really cool study. I think this was on Freakonomics or it was on Stephen Levitt's podcast, where they talked about how I think it was that podcast where they said, like, if you cheer for a team, even if you don't bet, but if you cheer for a team, the losses hurt you twice as much on your happiness scale as the wins help you. And so right. And like, so not only are you paying a vig in sports betting, you're paying a vig in life. So just remember that when you get involved in this racket, it's like there are a number of different things there, but you are paying the vig in life. I want to remember which podcast that was. I want to say it was one of the Freakonomics episodes.
It very much sounds like a Freakonomics thing, or like a Malcolm Gladwell thing. I think for me that both things are negative, but it's like probably like 3-1 in terms of how much I hate losing. And then when I win something, I immediately think about how like, oh, it's luck and none of this is real, and I'm very bad at that, and I guess occasionally we do celebrate victories together, which is a good thing. It's important. I was going to bring something up. I think this is another motivating factor, where it's the benefit that you get from doing the research and forming the hypothesis to place a bet has in itself intrinsic value, where it's fun. It increases your joy in life to be able to talk about sports intelligently, right? So like, I'll give you an example. In the Euros, men's Euros, I haven't followed the women's ones that closely, but there was value in me learning about the teams to bet them, but also in now learning about the teams, I could talk to the other people that I was going to be betting with about them. And that gave me joy and like value in life. And so I think with other things, for example, the stock market, like that just doesn't exist as much, right? You show up to like a party and it's like, hey, I'd love to tell you about, the stock market. You're going to get booed out of the place, right? You come in and you're like, yeah, I've got some good tips on this random ass, football game that we're going to play, and people, you're the life of the party, right? It's a very different kind of, joy that you get out of doing the work that you don't get for other things. Okay, we're going to talk division bets here. Before we do, a reminder that it is July 17th, which, by the way, shout out to my girlfriend whose birthday it is today. Happy birthday, Sam.
It's my half birthday today.
Look at you. Congratulations. Getting half a year younger. And that means that the NFL season is like 53 days away. So you should make your way over to underdogfantasy.com to play some best ball fantasy. It's the best way to prepare yourself for your big redraft leagues and get skin in the game at the same time. It's really easy. You just draft a team and then you don't have to worry about making additions or pickups or start sits or any of this. Your best players count every week towards your score, and you can win like legit money here. And we've got a ton of great content on pff.com to help you with all of those drafts. Go to pff.com, 40% off right now, by the way, with promo code PFF40. It's a great way to get involved. And Underdog has this awesome deal where they will match your first $100 deposit, up to $100 deposit, if you use promo code PFF. So go make that happen. There's the Best Ball Mania, which has $10 million worth of total prizes that you can get involved in. Underdogfantasy.com or the app, which is super simple to use, and I highly recommend. Okay, division futures win totals. So this is something that I don't remember honestly seeing last year, but DraftKings has them up on their sportsbook. And this is win totals, but only within the division. So, you think about a division opponent, you're going to play them twice. So you're going to get those 6 games against your divisional opponents. And obviously those are a little more hotly contested. There are some things that you will note within divisional games that you won't find within other matchup. So there's a little nuance there. So let's drill into a couple of different divisions here and talk about some of the lines and which ones we like. You have a great article. We won't give away the entire article up on pff.com, so you can go check it out and see all of the ones, but we'll talk about a few here. Let's start with the NFC North.
Yeah, the NFC North is one where, I think that this is where you can have a number of different outs on the same thing, right? So one of the key theses that I have for the Lions being good is that the Bears are going to suck, right? So if you don't believe that the Lions are going to be the beneficiary of the Bears being horrible, then you can bet into these other markets, right? So if you look right now, the Lions, for example, they're lined at 2.5 division wins. Over is plus 115. I believe that has actually, it stayed the same basically.
Yeah,
the Vikings have 3.5. This is a team, the Vikings, who under Kirk Cousins just lost their first game to Detroit last year. I actually watched that game yesterday. Randomly, Detroit had missed 2 4th down and ones in their own territory and still won the game. Funny. But Minnesota over 3.5 is plus 135. If you look at Green Bay, the Packers, they are lined at 4 division wins. Overs minus 150. I think that's actually gotten that stayed the same as well. So those are all, like, if you think the Bears are going to suck, right, then let's say they all all these other teams like split with each other, then you're talking about Green Bay at 5-1. That'd be 4-2, right? And then they're all 4-2 if they split with each other, right? And they all sweep the Bears, right? So with that, Minnesota goes over, Green Bay pushes, Detroit goes over, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's kind of maybe where you start, and you say, okay, let's say Green Bay sweeps Detroit, then they all 3 go over, right? And you kind of permute through these things, and obviously we have a simulation. That's basically what I'm basing all of this off of. But it's a way to bet against if you, it's a different way to bet some of the same things you think is kind of what I like to think of these.
I think there's also, you want to think about when, these games are happening. So the one that I think is interesting is the Packers, because there's, to me, the Packers are the team here with, honestly, interestingly, the most unknown. Like, I very much believe the Bears are going to suck. I think that the Vikings and Lions are going to be decent. And with the Packers, there's a lot of, frankly, unknown because you don't have Devontae Adams there anymore. And so, you think about, what does that regular season look like? Well, they actually start out with a game in Minnesota.
Yeah.
That's their opener. They then play Chicago at home this in week 2. They start off with those 2 divisional games, but then they don't have a divisional game, until like week, I don't know, it's like 10 or 12 or something like that. So that's an interesting one. If you believe that, they are going to maybe start off, a little shaky, like maybe that's a gettable game for Minnesota there at home. The thing is, like, the Packers could be playing without any receivers and beat the Bears because Aaron Rodgers quite literally owns the Bears. So they're getting one division win kind of right off the bat. But, if that game against the Vikings, where if that game were being played in like week 10 or 12, I feel like that would be more of a Packers, I'd be more confident the Packers had figured it out by now. But in that week 1, maybe I'm a little less bullish. So I think that, to me, is where that Packers, over kind of hinges. My favorite, though, to be clear, is the Lions over 2.5 at plus 115. In large part because you've got the Bears, who they're better than, but you have 2 other teams in the Packers and the Vikings who, while definitely better than the Lions, like, there's not a game where the Lions are playing those teams and I don't think they have a shot. Obviously the Packers are a little bit better, but there are some question marks there at receiver. So to me, over 2.5, you figure they're going to get 1.5 wins from the Chicago Bears. And then you need 1 win amongst 4 games between the Vikings and the Packers. I think that makes sense to me. Right.
And these division matchups, by the way, you can handicap the end of the season. Interestingly, right?
True.
So what I really like here is these 4 teams play each other in weeks 17 and 18.
Mm-hmm.
So the Vikings go to Green Bay and place the Packers in January 1st. Yep. And then they go to Chicago and play the Bears in week 18 on January 8th. The Lions play the Bears in week 17. And then they go to Green Bay and face the Packers in week 18. I actually think this is what sets up the Chicago under and the Lions over better than maybe the market is indicating, because if the Packers are who we think they are, you might get a carbon copy of what we saw in 2021, where it's, the Packers are kind of going to play half that game, and then Jordan Love comes in, and, the Lions are fairly good. So, they'll battle till the end. Maybe they're trying to win the 9th game of the season because they want to have a winning season for Dan Campbell, blah, blah, blah. Mom's great with charities. And I'm like, that's kind of where I see, whereas so Chicago's playing Minnesota. Minnesota's likely going, I think Minnesota could be good this year, but I don't think that they're going to be so good that they're going to be resting starters in week 18 against the Bears, right? Like, I think that they're going to be battling somewhat for seeding, right? Like, there's no universe where they're clear of the division or the 1 seed, by a game or 2 where they can rest against the Bears. So, I think the Bears have to come to play every single division game, and whereas the Lions might not even have to play it out against the Packers and they might be favored in week 18. Who knows? If the Packers are sitting people, that could be a favorite situation.
You also have the opportunity for the Lions to play the Vikings in a game where the Vikings need to win to, get into the playoffs or continue to be in the playoff hunt, and you get to watch Kirk Cousins somehow find a way to lose to Jared Goff. That's also a nice opportunity.
And look, we've seen it happen before. I watched the game the other day, and honest to God, the fact is the Lions had a 14-point lead in that game. and blew it, and then came back and won. So that was what I call a Vikings special, if you will, of a game in that year. So it's a pretty like, I like these markets. One of them, our friend, I'm going to shout him out here, Tej Seth, who has the Take the Points podcast with our intern Arj and Menon, both of them former or current PFF interns. One of them that they like, but we don't want to go through all of them. But one of them they like is the New Orleans Saints over 3 division wins. That was one where I still haven't. I think there's a decent amount of uncertainty about Baker Mayfield, so I did not write that up. But I do think that one's a possibility to be pretty good. Over 3.5 is plus 135, so that must have moved a little bit since that was talked about. But there's the universe, right, where the Saints own the Bucks, right? We've seen that they've won 4 of the last 5 against them with Brady at the helm. Mm-hmm. Atlanta stinks, Carolina stinks. The path to 4 is pretty clear.
They also have exact order division finishes on DraftKings, and obviously you need to get 4 things to go right. Now they are not independent, right? So you're not going to see ridiculous. You're not going to see the same thing you would see for a 4 game parlay, right? There is a lot of correlation here, obviously, but the NFC, Tampa Bay 1, New Orleans 2, Carolina 3, Atlanta 4 is plus 250. And interestingly, the second most likely outcome, which I think is telling here, is it goes Tampa Bay, Carolina, New Orleans, Atlanta, which is interesting, right? The swap being between Carolina and New Orleans as opposed to Carolina and Atlanta tells you how bad the Falcons are, but tells you that the market is probably giving a little bit now of respect to Carolina with Baker. But that's interesting, right? Like 250 for an exact division finish. I don't know what your initial take is on something like that.
Yeah, 250. I mean, the hard part is, the shenanigans that can happen at the bottom, right? But yeah, 250. I mean, it also depends upon where you're already levered up. Like if you have, like I have some Tampa Bay plus 120 to win the division, so I might not be willing to go back in and give some of that back just to bet on Atlanta and Carolina to be bad. But yeah, if you are, those are all great things to throw a little bit on. It's another way, again, like if you think Detroit's going to be good, then if you think about like a Green Bay, Detroit, Minnesota, Chicago finish, that one has a pretty sizable payout on DraftKings or FanDuel. So like I said, I think with the beauty of these markets is they let you wager differently on things you already believe. And frankly, they give you more outs, right? Like there could be a situation, for example, if I think, with respect to the Detroit Lions, I think they're good, but maybe I don't necessarily like, maybe they don't make the playoffs, right? But they win 9 games, right? And I can get a better than 4-1, I believe, payout. I can get a better than, so let me see here, NFC North. So if I go first Green Bay, but you can even have first Green Bay, second Detroit, right? At plus 8-1. There's a scenario where that happens, but Detroit doesn't make the playoffs, right? And so you have some out there. So maybe you have a 4-1 Detroit to make the playoffs ticket, but then you have, and that doesn't hit, but you get a little bit back on first Green Bay, second Detroit. Let's say if Chicago finish 3rd and 4th, but Detroit's maybe 9 and 8 and doesn't make it, right? Like I think that again, you want to have those outs.
I'll give you one division total that I really like. Most of these are kind of have some interesting juice on them. The Seattle Seahawks under 2 division wins. They are so bad. They are so bad. I mean, I actually think we're going to be surprised by how bad they are. Like, I think we may, at the end of this year, we're going to look back and we're going to go, man, Russell Wilson is really good at football because look how bad the Seahawks are and look how much better, he looks with an offense that's actually not, playing with one hand tied behind its back. the fact that they were so much higher in expected or like actual perfectly covered plays against, and the fact that that he actually performs well above average, I think is incredible. But it also should make you very, very worried about what happens with Drew Lock there. I mean, I think it's just going to be an absolute nightmare, and in a very hotly contested division where, I mean, they should be like a 10 to 14 point underdog against every one of those divisional opponents, because those divisional opponents have to win every game to be in the hunt, right? And so there's no letting up there. Under at -115, I just think is that I think is my favorite one.
You don't, I would imagine, because you're a rational person, you don't at all buy into this idea that there is some sort of hex that the Seattle Seahawks have over the San Francisco 49ers, because I think that that's really what's into this, right? Where Seattle has really owned San Francisco for the last, even while the Niners have been good. You're basically saying that that's BS, which I agree with.
I mean, it's BS, and it's also the ownership is partially Russell Wilson's, right? Yeah. You play the Seahawks, and everyone knows this who watches football. It's like, yeah, they're getting killed, but like there's an 80% chance that no matter what, Russell Wilson is going to make it a close game or figure out a way to win. And that has been the case, obviously, in those divisional games. I'm going to go ahead and throw this out there, Eric. I don't think Drew Lock is going to have that same impact on the game. I know that's crazy to think about.
Seems weird.
Yeah, but I'm going to go ahead and guess that after running the ball on first and second down, Drew Lock ain't coming up aces on third down. Is there one more that you would like to give our beloved Syndicate?
So I'm just going to throw this out there. It's I'm going to be hashtag bias. But I think the Chiefs at +110 to go over 3.5 division wins, I think is they have. I mean, you're basically, Patrick Mahomes has lost 2 games to the Chargers and 1 game to the Raiders since becoming the starting quarterback. So this is basically saying that Patrick Mahomes has to lose more AFC West games this year than he has his entire Chiefs career combined.
Yep. I
get that it's different now, but it's not different now. Patrick's still Mahomes. It's
this is an interesting one. When do the Chiefs play the Broncos first?
Let me look. I think they play the Broncos a little bit later. So the Chiefs go Chargers week 2, Raiders week 5. Broncos are all the way. So they play the Broncos 2 times in the last 5 games of the year. They play the Broncos in Broncos December 11th. That's a Sunday night game. And then they home to Broncos January 1st, a noon game.
Well, that's interesting, because I think that, that makes me a little more nervous there. I think those are that's the team that you want to play early, as opposed to being late in the season. But you could say the same about the Chiefs, right? Them kind of figuring out their offense. So look, my guess is that after the noise has equilibrated, the Chiefs will be better than the Broncos. But you're right. If Russell Wilson figures out the Hackett offense, and let's say the Chiefs have injuries on defense, like they've always been susceptible to the stuff that the Broncos do well, which is get open in man coverage and run the football. So you're right. I mean, that's the thing. They go to Raiders January 8th. They're done with the Chargers by November 20th. So that's another one where the Chargers are usually better at the beginning of the season-ish, right? So maybe luck doesn't shine that far on the Chiefs. This is more of a play on just saying the Chiefs are still pretty good. I think that's fair. I'll let you ride with that one. Do you have any recommendations for this week?
Yes, I actually gave this recommendation out to a listener who was listening to the show. Let me make sure I find the direct question so that we can give everybody in the syndicate the recommendation as they would have it there. But it's called Mindset, the book by Carol S. Dweck. It's a book that I got as a part of a grant when I was a professor. This is from a Lucas Volman, at Lucas_Volman. Any books or podcasts you guys recommend to start learning about the growth mindset that you were talking about on the pod? This is a good one. It's called Mindset, the New Psychology of Success. Basically, it's just like, I think it's a really good way to examine, a lot of us have kids, a lot of us, like you manage most of PFF, let's be honest. And all of us are constantly sort of like, hey, how do we motivate ourselves? How do we motivate people? And it's a different goal to motivate somebody who's more of a fixed mindset person than it is a growth mindset person. And it's important to know the differences between those two things. And it's important to be able to navigate that.
It's a really good point. This book, by the way, is like 101 for anyone who's teaching, because like you've so many students, and I did Teach for America, where you're going and you're teaching in areas that like the belief is like, my parents didn't learn anything, everybody hates me, the government is against me, like I'm screwed, right? And it's like, that you come in with such a fixed mindset as a 10, 12-year-old, and it's super important as a teacher not to have that mindset, right? But it's interesting, and I recommend everyone go check this book out. But I will say this, as a person, as an adult, it's also one of the most valuable assets that you can have, because your mindset around doing things that you haven't done before is, in my opinion, one of the biggest determinants of how successful you're going to be. Like, if you believe that at age, whatever you are right now, you've learned everything that you need to in life to be as successful as you want to be, you should probably put down the crack pipe. Like, that's just not the case. And so either you believe that you can continue to grow and learn and be successful at doing those things, or you're just kind of pegging yourself at where you're at and you're saying that's where I'm going to be. So sorry for the pump up speech, but I think that's a great recommendation. I second that recommendation for everybody. I don't have, I was trying to think if I had a particular recommendation. I'll give everyone an anti-recommendation, which is, I was sick this past week, and my whole ethos towards sickness is trying to sweat it out. And it did not work for me this week. Thankfully, I've managed to recover, but it really didn't help. So my recommendation for people is, if you're sick and you're focused on fitness, maybe give it a rest 1 or 2 days, and you'll be in a better spot. There's my recommendation for everybody. This was our podcast. We appreciate you guys hanging out. We'll be back on Wednesday. Love y'all. Peace.